Gospel according to Luke, the 16th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Then Jesus said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and said to him, 'What is it that I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer.' The manager said to himself, 'What will I do, now that my master is taking the position away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do so that when I am dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their homes.' So summoning his master's debtors one by one, he asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' And he responded, 100 jugs of olive oil. And he said to him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 50. Then he asked another, 'How much do you owe?' And he replied, 100 containers of wheat. And he said to him, 'Take your bill and make it 80. And his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it's gone, it may welcome you into your eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much. And whoever is dishonest in very little is dishonest in very much. If then you have been faithful with dishonest wealth, who will entrust you to the true riches? And if you have not been faithful for what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and wealth." The gospel of our Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Please be seated. And this morning, if you'd like to take out, we're going to be finishing up our 3-week series on confessing the faith in a secular age. And today we wrap that up. I'm giving you a copy of sermon notes there in your bulletin. If you'd like to have those out, that may prove to be handy, not only as we navigate this text this morning, but perhaps later on the week. Step back, that might be a point of reflection in your devotions to go back and look at some of these. Would you join me now in a word of prayer? Father, we give you thanks for your word that calls us from death to life, from silence to speech, from idleness to action. Renew us, transform us once again to the living word in Christ Jesus our Lord. Amen. So this morning, as we think about confessing the faith in a secular age, we want to think about engaging or exposing, if you will, the myth of time and opportunity. The myth of time and opportunity. Charles Taylor, we've been following his work. We talked about this in forum downstairs between services. In his book, he asked this hard question for us. Why, as you see there in the top of your sermon notes, why was it virtually impossible not to believe in God in, say, 1500 in Western society and 2000, or we may say today, in 2019? Why is that not only a possibility, but many of us perhaps find it inescapable? That's the question. Jean Twenge, a psychologist out in California, she makes this observation in her book, I, Gen, that she wrote some years ago. And she's making these observations with regard to this particular generation in our society. You may have heard about this generation, the I-Gen generation. To put a little bit of texture on that, that would be people that would be born between about 1997 through about 18 years after that, so up until about 2015. To give some idea of where those kids are, the beginning of that generation, those born about 1997, would probably be juniors, maybe seniors in college. And the end of that generation, they were born about 4 years ago. That's the iGen generation. What's unique about that generation, as many of you may understand, is that there's never been a moment in the life of that generation where the cell phone has not been in existence. Just think about how that affects a generation. And it's not just about how it affects that generation, how it affects us in our society today. Anyway, Twenge makes this observation. Let me just share this with you. She makes this observation with students and an observation she's done through research. And here's the quote. Nearly all of that generation slept with their phones, putting them under their pillows, on their mattress, or at the very least within arm's reach of the bed. They checked social media websites, watched videos right before they went to bed, reached for their phones again as they wake in the morning. They had to. All of them used it as their alarm. And let me suggest to you this morning, and you could certainly chew on this, you may disagree with this, and that's okay, but let me suggest to you that what this technology has done for us, I have a cell phone, the technology is good, it allows us to do some things we could never do before. But allow me to just suggest that maybe what's come about through that is that it has amped up the anxiety in our lives to the point where we don't want to miss a tweet. We don't want to be left out of social media because that's where our friends are. We don't want to be disconnected at email because that's how we connect. We don't want to be disconnected from the ability to buy because that's how we do it. We do it through our apps. So think about the anxiety that has been raised not only in the iGen generation, but my guess is for each and every one of us through this technology. If you don't believe me, take away a phone from an iGener for just one day. Just take it away. And you watch the anxiety and the anger just peak, right? But my guess is there's something else afoot. In other words, there's something underneath that. The phone is just sort of superficial. There's something else underneath. And I'd like to suggest to you today that what's underneath that has everything to do with our sense of time and opportunity. I'll say that again. Time and opportunity. Here is what we believe. Again, chew on this. You may disagree, but here's what we believe in North America. We believe that your time is your own. We have been conditioned to believe that you own your time, that it belongs to you. And not only that, you and I have been conditioned to believe that not only does your time belong to you, but you have been conditioned to believe that we are to make the most of that time, and we choose the opportunities that suit us. That's what we have been conditioned and led to believe in our society. And if you don't believe that, allow me to suggest this, that all of the ad marketers, the research capitalists, not only do they believe it, not only do they understand it, but they have gotten you and me and our society to buy into it. Hook, line, and sinker. It is a billion-dollar industry today. It is there. It is real. So let's consider this morning that whole sense of time and opportunity. Let's consider it for what it is. The parable that we have before us. A difficult parable, no doubt about it, found only in Luke. Here's the deal with difficult parables. They're supposed to be difficult. They're supposed to be wrestled with. They're not easy, and that's okay. So wrestle with it and see what God is showing us in the parable. Let's just read a portion. And I've given you there just a couple verses, verses 8 and 9. Let's do this. Let's read this together. And what I have taken the liberty of doing here this morning, we have the NRSV translation, good translation. I have inserted just a portion of the King James translation because I think, quite frankly, it gets at what's going on here in the text a little bit better than the NRSV. Let's read this together. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by the mammon of unrighteousness, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into eternal homes. I like King James here because mammon, taken this way, mammon is really a sense of pursuing an object, whether it's money, whether it's time, whether it's anything, but it's pursuing an object that is perhaps just neutral, but pursuing that object to the sense that we begin to deify it. In other words, we turn it into its own God. Here's the common theme in this parable, if you think about it. You have the slaves. 3 people mentioned in this parable. The slaves, which the slaves in that society own nothing. Their wealth is not their own. Here's the deal. The master of the slave, the steward of the master, guess what? Probably also a slave, which, by the way, although they may assume this wealth belongs to them or their master, they don't own it either. You ready for this one? the master, the rich landlord, which oftentimes gets paralleled or interpreted as God, which I don't think is helpful, nor is it suggested in the parable. Guess what? When it boils down to it, neither does the rich man. Neither does the landlord. That's the point. The wealth has been entrusted to them. To them. No doubt about it, it is a parable about wealth. Allow me to suggest to you that wealth, although it may in fact be good, neutral, or in fact our golden calf, as we talked about last week, let me suggest to you that the new golden calf in our modern day society, in our secular age, may not be money, but may in fact be time and opportunity. You want to tick somebody off in our culture today, you know what you do? You waste their time. Because we have bought into the idea that time, again, belongs to me, to us. We have bought into the idea that opportunity belongs to me in my little cocoon of life. In other words, I choose the opportunity that best suits me, irregardless of what God might think, irregardless of what my neighbor might think, but I create the opportunity that I want to engage in because time belongs to me. Notice the parable. No, it does not. That's the point. That time itself is something that God creates. Are you ready for that? The Apostles' Creed, when we confess these words, right from the get-go, right? I believe in God, the Father, Almighty, Creator of heaven and earth. The whole thing. The whole thing, even time itself, is a creation of God. Let's look at Taylor. And I've given you just an excerpt right there. Taylor talks about the cosmos idea. When he uses the word cosmos idea, he's talking about 500 years ago. This is how 500 years ago people understood church, how they understood God. The cosmos idea were closely connected to two features. A perception of the world as enchanted, of things as an expression, embodiment of spirits and forces, and, notice this, a complex understanding of time, in which secular chain of events was interwoven with higher times, whether it be Platonic influences, welcome Greco-Roman world, or God's eternity. Here's what we've lost in society today. We have lost this concept of time. It does not belong to you. But you and I are actually entrusted to steward our time. And here's this crazy thing that our secular world is not going to catch on to, is that God is active in time. God actually breaks in eternity into our daily lives in this time. And our society doesn't know what to do with it. Let me share with you a story. Now, when I share stories, I'm going to share a story about a family member. And here's our rule in the Skinner household. Before we share stories about family members, we always ask that question. I'll say, hey, I'd like to share this story in a sermon. What do you think? And sometimes the answer is no. We honor that. We honor that. And sometimes the answer is yes. I'm going to share a story of my youngest daughter, Taryn. And I asked her, as a matter of fact, as soon as this happened, she said, Dad, share this. Share it with the world. They need to hear this. I asked her again here a couple nights ago, and she said, Dad, absolutely, Dad, share it. Let me share the story. So, daughter Taryn, she is an iGen generation, born 1999, front end of the iGen generation, second year nursing school, University of North Dakota, way up there in Grand Forks, North Dakota, the Holy Land, right? I see a few from that area up there. Short story, she's going to go to Bismarck, visit a friend of hers, and stay with parents. They park her car in Fargo, North Dakota. They drive to Bismarck. They're in Bismarck for the weekend, and her iPhone goes wonky. Now, if you really want to get an iGener really rattled and anxious and upset, it's when the phone goes wonky, all right? So here's the deal. They go into an iStore. They go to an Apple store, and they say, hey, can you fix this phone? They look at it and say, I don't know, it's pretty screwed up. Let's try wiping the phone. And that technology means we're going to just take all the apps off. We're going to just blank it out, wipe it out. Let's see what happens. Hopefully it'll restart. We got backup there in the cloud somewhere. It'll restart. You get your phone back, right? They wipe the phone. They go to turn on and say, I got bad news for you. Your phone is just broken. It ain't working. We are having a major crisis here in Taryn's life, right? She calls me on her friend's phone and says, Dad, I got a problem. I got to get home. I don't know the way home without the Navigator app on the phone. You laugh, right? You laugh. My generation, we had this thing called a map. I'm explaining this to her. It's called a map. So I don't know what that is, Dad. I know how to get home because I followed the app on the Navigator app. So I said, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. I'm going to talk you through it. You get to Fargo. You call me on your friend's phone. You're going to get on Highway 10. You're going to look for these cities. You get a piece of paper. I got a piece of paper. Yeah, I got a piece of paper. Write this down. Detroit Lakes, first one, Detroit Lakes. Then Perham, Minnesota. You're going to look for this one. Then you're going to follow Highway 10. Write this down. Now read it back to me. Okay, blah, 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 blah. She's frantic. She's frantic. And I said, okay, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. She gets to Fargo, gets to her friend's house, calls me on her friend's phone, says, Dad, I'm going to start my journey. I said, all right, good. And I said, I will be praying for you. I'm for heavy prayer. Heavy prayer. And she starts off, right? And so she barely gets out of the neighborhood, and she gets turned around. I mean, not even out of the neighborhood, turned around. No phone, goes to fill up the car. So I got to put gas in the car. I'm going to ask the gas station attendant how to get back onto Highway 10 in Fargo. Gas station attendant says, well, it's real easy, young lady. Go down 3 blocks, take a left on 1st Street, 2 more blocks, take a left right there, follow the sign to Highway 10, you can't miss it. She is lost. Right? She finds a sign that says 10. She follows 10 for quite some time, realizing after about 10 miles, it's not Highway 10, but probably County Road 10. She's lost, perplexed, scared, frantic. I'm going to be late for work. Dad's going to be ticked, and I don't know where in the world I am. And so she's crying. She's crying. And she's having a meltdown in the car. And what does she do? She's driving down, and she sees this Lutheran church over on the side of the road. And thanks to you folks, she says, look, the good people, Lutheran church, I'm going to pull in there. She pulls in Lutheran church. They're having a rummage sale. And one of the church ladies sees her pulling into the rummage sale, sees her crying, runs out to the car and says, you poor thing, what's wrong? She says, I'm lost. I don't know where the world. My phone doesn't work. Dad's going to be mad. I'm lost for work. I have no idea where I am. You need to come in, sweetheart. Let's get you some food. You got to be famished. I'm okay, I don't need food. I'm just looking for Highway 10. No problem. You're not that far from Highway 10. Matter of fact, you only just drive about a mile and a half. Take a right. I will drive you there. You just follow me. That's okay. I'll be all right. I'll be fine, right? She gets into the car, and before she starts driving, she says, you know, I know the phone's broken. I ain't worried, but I'll just try to turn it on. She pushes the on button on the phone. That has been wiped. That has been broken for days. Doesn't work. The phone comes on. The Navigator app, which had been wiped off the phone, comes on. Along with the address in the app, 16394 Birchwood Lane, Brainerd, Minnesota, and the voice of Siri guiding her home. Shall we say, she calls Dad. Father, I have had a massive God experience. I said, yes, you have. Yes, you have. Here's the point. Time is not your own. It belongs to God. You and I are entrusted with time and opportunity. It belongs to God. Here's the deal. I talk to people all the time and say, you know, Pastor, we just have busy lives. Have busy lives. I don't have time to show up to worship on the Sabbath. I don't have time to show up to worship on a Sunday morning. And my response is, yes, you do. You've got plenty of time because it's not your own. It's God's time. And at the very forefront of God's time, I remind people, you were created. God put you together this way for the glory and praise of God. Here's the deal. He's not inventing anything new. Jesus is merely interpreting God's commandments in a different way. Here's what Jesus said. You can't serve 2 masters. You can't. You cannot serve both God and time. It doesn't work. Because here's what happens. You will either choose to be enslaved to the myriad of other false gods and other things going around in our world that you want nothing to do with, or you will be yoked to the true God. That's it. So the question is, how are you going to steward that time? And I would suggest to you that the God that rescues young girls through cell phones is the very same God that reaches out to you now. It's the very same God that gives you the wake-up call on a Sunday morning to be able to say, I am your God, and you belong to me. I have created you, I love you, and I am a jealous God. And one Sunday a week, one day a week, you have time to be in worship. You have time to praise this God. You have time for your life